I do not talk much. I never did, but when they asked me about Marc Márquez I answered, and nobody listened. There is a corner at Jerez, turn 3. The 19th of July 2020. I was sitting in Queensland watching a screen. Marc was in the gravel. His right arm was broken in 3 places, and within the hour everyone on television was saying the same thing. We warned you. He was too aggressive, too proud. He should have known better. I turned the television off. 6 years passed. 4 surgeries. 1 titanium plate that snapped inside his arm. 3 teams. 2 factories. And more crashes than any man should walk away from. Then one day, he came back. Not in a moment. In many months. Race by race. Win by win. Until he stood at the top of the world again. Level with Rossi on 7 Premier Class titles. I did not smile. I did not feel vindicated. Because I had said something once when nobody wanted to hear it. I said every rider is aggressive. That is not what makes Marc different. I said it in one interview. It appeared on page 10 of one newspaper. Nobody printed it again. And nobody understood what I was really warning them about. They still do not. Sepang, October 2015. I was watching from home. I did not need to be in the paddock to feel what was happening. Valentino Rossi walked into the press conference. He pointed at Marc. He said things I will not repeat here, because you have heard them 1,000 times already. And from that day forward, the entire world had a story ready to tell. Marc Márquez was the villain. Rossi said it. Lorenzo said it. Every journalist wrote it. The Safety Commission met about it. Every incident on track was filtered through the same lens. He was the boy who destroyed the sport. I did not think Marc was innocent. I did not think Rossi was wrong either. I thought both of them were doing what champions do when they cannot beat someone with speed alone. But I also thought the entire world was looking at the wrong story. A reporter asked me what I thought. I gave him one sentence. I said every rider is aggressive. If they were not, they would not be sitting on that motorcycle. That sentence appeared on page 10 of one newspaper, below 3 lines about a tire test. Nobody quoted it again. I was not angry. I understood how this worked. I had lived in an era when men died on racetracks and no journalist wrote long essays about who was too aggressive. That era was over. Now every frame was frozen and magnified. And if you want to understand why I saw Marc differently than everyone else, you have to go back to 1992. Assen, a race I never finished. Assen, the 27th of June 1992. I was leading the World Championship by a wide margin. Friday afternoon practice. I do not remember the impact. I only remember waking up in a hospital in the Netherlands with my right leg broken in 4 places. The Dutch surgeon told me amputation was the safest option. My father was standing outside the door. I was 27 years old. I chose to keep the leg. Dr. Costa brought me back to Italy. He tried something experimental. He stitched both of my legs together to keep the blood flowing into the right one. I lay in that position for 3 weeks. It took 3 years before I walked normally again. 3 years later, I stood on the top step at Suzuka. Then I won again, and again, and again. 5 world championships, 5 in a row. Now let me tell you about Marc. They called him reckless. I know what reckless looks like. I almost lost a leg to it at Assen. Marc is not reckless. Marc simply does not know how to live in the middle. That is not a flaw. That is the only thing keeping him in the game. Aggressive is not reckless. Aggressive is the only thing that keeps a rider on the track when his body is telling him to stop. I know that because I lived it. When you have felt what it is like to be told you might never race again, you understand something the rest of the paddock never will. But I was not the only one who thought this way. There was one other man, another Australian. He understood Marc even deeper than I did, because he lived the same thing, only 15 years after me. Let me tell you about Kevin Schwantz, world champion, 1993, one of the fastest men I ever raced against. A few years back, Kevin and I were sitting in a bar in Texas. Late night, 2 old riders. He said something I have never forgotten. He said if the modern paddock ever went back and watched our races from the early 90s, they would ban our entire generation. I laughed, because he was right. Kevin only said it louder than I ever did. We rode when nobody was watching. There were no drones, no high-definition slow motion, no social media. Contact was part of the sport. 3 seasons in a row, the top riders crashed, broke bones and came back. Nobody wrote long essays calling them destroyers of the sport. Then let me tell you about Casey Stoner. Casey was not my friend, but Casey was Australian. Casey rode a Honda. Casey rode a Ducati. And Casey, just like Marc, just like me, was told he was too aggressive. Every time Casey spoke about Marc on Australian television, he was not giving an opinion. He was looking at himself in a mirror. Casey said the modern paddock had forgotten what a rider at the limit actually feels like. He said contact is the nature of racing, not a defect. He was right. Nobody printed that either. 3 men, 3 generations, 3 world championships each, seeing the same thing. And still, nobody listened to any of us. But if you think Marc was the first rider they got wrong, you have not understood what Casey lived through before him. Let me take you back to 2007. Casey Stoner was 21 years old. He was riding a Ducati that the entire paddock said no man could tame. Every rider on that machine had failed. Casey won the world championship in his first season with it. The paddock said he was lucky. They said he was too aggressive. They said he did not understand the limits of his motorcycle. I knew that was a lie. I had watched him ride. Casey was not lucky. Casey was riding at a threshold nobody else in the paddock had the courage to reach. In 2011, he won another world championship, this time with Honda. And then, in 2012, at only 27 years old, still at the very top of the sport, he walked away. The paddock said he was mentally weak. They said he was soft. They said he did not deserve to be there. I knew the truth was different. Casey had not run out of speed. He had run out of energy from explaining himself every single day to a paddock that never wanted to understand him. 3 years after Casey walked away, the same paddock started doing the same thing to Marc. Argentina, 2018. Jerez, Austin. One mistake becomes a character. One incident becomes an identity. The paddock had lost the ability to tell them apart. This is not the story of one rider. This is the story of a sport that keeps destroying its greatest talents. And 4 years after Argentina, they made Marc pay the same price I paid in '92. Jerez, the 19th of July 2020, the Andalusian Grand Prix. I was watching from home. I did not see it the way the cameras saw it. I saw it the way a man who has already crashed at that speed sees it. Marc lost the front at turn 3, 213 kilometers per hour. His right arm broke in multiple places. Within minutes, every commentator on television was saying the same thing. Doohan was wrong. This is the price of aggression. I was not shocked, because I had lived it, and there was one man standing next to both of these stories. The same man. His name is Alberto Puig. Alberto was my team manager at Honda through most of the 90s. He was the man who stood outside my hospital room in Assen. He was there when the Dutch surgeon spoke about amputation. He was there when I chose to keep the leg. He was there through every one of those 3 years of recovery. 30 years later, Alberto was the manager of the Repsol Honda team, Marc's team. Alberto was there when Marc refused to end his season after Jerez. Alberto watched the same choice happen again, in another man, in another decade. 6 days after the crash, Marc came back. Same track, same motorcycle. The titanium plate inside his arm snapped. Bone infection followed. 3 more surgeries. 4 in total. I picked up the phone. I was going to call Alberto. I did not, because I knew Marc would not listen. 30 years earlier, I had not listened to anyone either. The Dutch surgeon had told me amputation was the safest choice. I refused. I nearly died because of that choice. But I also became the man who stood at the top of the world 5 times because of that same choice. There is a kind of champion who does not know how to live in the middle. Their price is always high. But history is not written by men who live in the middle. And I went back to the same living room in Queensland, the same television I had turned off 6 years earlier. Marc came back, not in one moment, in many months, race by race, win by win. He had changed teams, he had changed manufacturers, he had gone through 4 surgeries just to be able to sit on the motorcycle without pain. And he had returned to the top of the world, level with Rossi on 7 Premier Class titles. But what made me nod was not the championship. It was the moment he publicly admitted the biggest mistake of his career had been coming back too early from surgery. That is what I had been trying to say for 10 years. That is what I had learned in my own blood in '92. Let me tell you about Danny Pedrosa. Danny rode next to Marc at Honda for 7 seasons. Nobody understood Marc from the inside the way Danny did. After Marc returned to the top, Danny spoke publicly. He said this was the greatest comeback in the history of the sport. Nobody in the paddock could argue with him. This was not my vindication. This was the vindication of a kind of champion the world had been trying to fix for almost a decade. Marc had finally understood what I had been trying to say. He had paid the same price I paid in '92. But if you think this story ends here, you have not understood what I have really been trying to tell you. Now I look straight at you. For more than a decade you believed I was defending Marc. You were wrong. I was never defending anyone. I was trying to show you a cycle. 1992. Assen. They said I was too aggressive. 2007. Ducati. They said Casey was too aggressive. 2015. Sepang. They said Marc was too aggressive. 3 riders, 3 generations, 7 500cc titles between the first two, 9 world championships for Marc. The evidence has been written in black ink on white paper for the entire world to read. But you did not look at history. You looked at slow motion replay. And right now, as we speak, the same paddock is starting to do the same thing to a young rider named Pedro Acosta. They say he is too aggressive, too proud, that he needs to learn to hold back. Kevin Schwantz called me last week. He had been watching. He said only one sentence to me. He said they are doing it again. I did not answer. There was nothing to answer. This cycle will continue. Because it is not about Marc. It is not about Casey. It is not about me. It is about you. I never warned you about Marc Márquez. I warned you about what you are becoming. And one day, someone will make a video like this one about Pedro Acosta, and you will not listen to that one either.